Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and as I am recording this, the worst season in the history of Major League Baseball has just concluded. I don't mean for the whole league. I mean, it seems like a really rather lovely season for the whole league. They're doing the playoffs right now. But rather, what I mean is the worst single season for any given team ever. And even though the team in question did not lose the most games ever, they barely didn't quite lose the most games ever, all the other metrics make it clear that your 2025 Colorado Rockies were the worst team in modern baseball history. It was ugly, and I was there for the whole thing. I watched portions, at least, of pretty much every game. It was a slow-motion train wreck. They finished the season losing almost 80 more games than they won, which you think would be mathematically and physically impossible, but they defied the odds. They gave up 1,000 runs, which is kind of a miracle in and of itself, and they were outscored cumulatively by their opponents by more than 420 runs. No one had ever been outscored by more than 300 and change. So it's truly a remarkable season. So I say all of this to just acknowledge that I am well aware of how ridiculous the scenario I'm about to put in front of you here is. But let's imagine that in 2,000 years from now, a bunch of people are sitting around doing some futuristic version of a podcast, right? Somebody says something like, well, I dug up an ancient source about sports in North America in the late 20th and early 21st century. And it looks like there was a sports team at the highest level called the Rockies who won some sort of championship. And scholars are divided as to exactly who these Rockies were. Apparently, there was a baseball team. The scant records we have indicate they weren't very good. So when we hear this reference in this ancient source to the championship Rockies, it could be a reference to the Colorado baseball Rockies, who perhaps won a championship that history has forgotten. Or it could be a reference to the old Colorado Denver hockey Rockies, a hockey team from whatever it was, the 1970s and 1980s, who played in the NHL before the Colorado Avalanche and eventually moved and became the New Jersey Devils, at which point they did win a championship. Scholars are divided as to exactly what the original source has in view here. That'd be a really fun history mystery for 2,000 years from now on a podcast. But if you can kind of understand the anatomy of the little riddle that I just put together, like, ooh, what is this passing, distant, ancient reference to the Rockies winning a championship? If you can understand that, then you kind of understand the history riddle that we're dealing with here in our epilogue on the book of Galatians. One of the craziest questions when it comes to studying Galatians in its historical context is that we don't know exactly what Galatia we're talking about. And of course, over the course of the season, you and I have discussed this. And as we've worked it through, I've felt like the preponderance of evidence points us to the southern half of the Roman province of Galatia in the towns of Lystra, Derbe, Iconium, and Pisidian Antioch, 4 towns we have visited at length and learned a lot about over the last couple of weeks. And the historical record, the biblical record, and the archaeological record in all 4 towns confirms to me beyond any reasonable shadow of a doubt that those cities did indeed receive the gospel, probably the letter of Galatians, if not the letter itself, at least the message of Galatians, and they internalized it, and Galatians worked. But to properly suss this thing the whole way out, we have to consider, much like in my hypothetical scenario, that there were 2 sports teams called the Rockies at the highest level. We have to consider that there are 2 areas, both called Galatia, that could be in view. And even though I'm completely satisfied that we're talking about the right Galatia, there's a whole lot of people who went to school for a lot longer than me and have larger brains than me and are better at things than me, who legitimately think that some towns in northern Galatia were the ones that this was written to. And I thought, you know what? Dang it. let's just be thorough. Let's go up there and see if we poke around a little bit at a couple of these towns a bit more quickly, these towns that don't appear in the Bible in North Galatia, and let's just find out. Because maybe what we're going to find is that it looks like Christianity worked out real quick and real early there too. Maybe we'll unearth some ancient evidence that even specifically the ideas from the book of Galatians seem to have uniquely taken hold there. And if so, then it would be like in my hypothetical scenario, it would be like if both the Colorado baseball Rockies and the Colorado Denver hockey Rockies had both won a championship. The way you would round out that 2,000 years from now, the hypothetical question that a podcaster might try to sort through from a big history riddle about which Rockies it was would be to just say, well, the question is moot because both teams won a championship. So we can just move forward knowing that both teams had some success either way. So let's go find out if Galatians worked out, or if we can find any evidence as to whether or not Galatians worked out in North Galatia. Now, I have narrowed it down to 3 towns up north that I think the Apostle Paul would have been most likely to have visited, given the Roman road maps that I have here in front of me, and the 3 missionary journey maps of Paul that I have right here in front of me. Yeah, I went out and bought a bunch of expensive atlases, by the way, with my Patreon money this month so that I could look at this more closely and report accurately to you. Thank you to everyone who supports this program. I hope you like your stickers. I'm sorry a few of them had marks on them. I really thought the postcard thing would work. It said it had a protective seal on it. I hope they look good enough. I really hope you like them. So as I look at these maps, I'm considering a few factors. One, where would Paul have been likely to have walked? I know a little bit about his decision-making matrix for where he traveled and where he didn't. I think I can kind of guess what sort of towns he would avoid and what sort of towns he would go through. Also, I can just look at the roads and say, well, if he did go through here, it would have had to have been at this moment in his journeys or this moment. Which roads would make sense and what towns are on those roads. And then the other thing I'm considering is just prominence. What towns in North Galatia would be the towns you'd want to go to given their history and their influence and their prestige and their likelihood of responding well. So I've nailed it down to 3. And the 3 are Ankara, which is modern-day Ankara, Turkey, the capital of Turkey. So that's one, Ankara. Another one is Tavium, which is an ancient Gaulish or Gallic tribal headquarters. And then finally, Gordium, which at times is technically in Galatia and at other times is technically in northeast Phrygia. More on all 3 of those as we are able to go along. I'm burning all the time setting this up and talking about the Rockies and the defunct hockey team called the Rockies that became the Devils. What am I doing? Okay, we got to take some ground today. We're about to run out of time on Galatians in general. So which one of these should we talk about first? You know what? Let's just burn one of these. Let's burn the easy one real quick. Tavium. There's nothing. He didn't go to Tavium. And even though Christianity does seem to have caught on in Tavium, it looks like it must have caught on later. There's just absolutely nothing even in the zip code of a biblical reference of Paul going to the city of Tavium, one of the 3 great cities of North Galatia. There's nothing in early church history at all for a few hundred years after Christianity got there. However, Tavium, it was a good-sized town. It was a town of influence back then. Apart from Ankara, it was probably the most ethnically loyalist Gallic, that is people from Gaul, that is people who had moved from France, ethnic ancient French people. It was probably the most Gaulish, other than Ankara, of all the towns. And eventually it looks as though these ethnic Gauls in North Galatia did respond to the gospel. And eventually a church did take hold, and because it was a big and influential town, the bishop of Tavium gained influence, and in 325 AD was invited to the Council of Nicaea. That's a pretty big honor. That's the big one, right? Like if you're talking with somebody and they're like, yeah, I kind of remember some things from church history and like church councils and stuff. And if you're at a party and people are talking about church councils and you feel like you got to know one, but you really want to get it right, I mean, what are you going to go to? What's the, you're going to say the Council of Nicaea, right? That's the safe bet. And I don't blame you for saying that one. This is probably the ultra important church council from the first millennium. Maybe Jerusalem, the one in Acts, is the only one that's more important. It's right up there, is the point. So to be invited to the Council of Nicaea, I mean, dang, I'd take it. I don't know that they're having one of those anytime soon, but I mean, if they're doing invites or they're taking volunteers, I'd love to go to that. So that's a pretty big honor. That's a pretty cool thing. We have spotty records of bishops in Tavium for some time after that. As Tavium waned in influence, it looks like the local bishop there came under the head of Ankara. I mean, that's no surprise whatsoever. But I've dug a little bit. I don't see any evidence of anything that's like, well, we received the letter of Galatians, and here's a sermon from one of the bishops that reminds us of that. So as it pertains to Tavium, I'm going to say, nah, it just looks like that was a town that saw Christianity arrive sometime after the Bible, like a lot of places did in the Mediterranean world, in the ancient Roman world. And what do you know? It took really early, and a church took off there, and that is awesome. But I don't see anything that indicates that Galatians was written to there, or that we can determine anyway whether, Galatians worked on this town or not. I think we're going to have to put the big N/A on this one. Not applicable, not enough evidence. But I got a little more interesting stuff on the next two, and yeah, that's about a nice time to break right there. So we're going to shut it down for today. Tomorrow we'll go check out Gordium and Ankara, and then we'll be done with this exercise, which I have rather enjoyed. I know I keep harping on it and going on and on about it, but again, I'd be so grateful if you would look to the future and what you have coming up in terms of the rhythm of your life and the room that you have in your life, or the podcast or something like this. I'd be so honored if you would consider coming with me into the book of Philemon, which is now just 4 or 5 episodes away from getting rolling. I'd be even more honored if you'd consider inviting a friend. Cool. That's good for now. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.